So, we are back, and we're moving on from methods. We'll revisit methods multiple times, and in a lot of different ways because they are the core unit of work in our program. But I want to quickly introduce you to the idea of collections. Now, there are a lot of different types of collections in C#, and when you hear the word collections, I want you to think of a group of these variables, a container that holds variables, that holds multiple values. Now, if I were creating a grade book for a teacher, and let's say that we had a course that had 10 grades in it, I could go through and identify grade 1, 92, grade 2, 93, grade 3, 94, and define variable after variable after variable every single time that I wanted to add a grade, and then average it, which can become cumbersome. There's a lot of extra coding happening. There's a lot of memory usage, and there's a lot of different things behind the scenes that's having to happen to basically store values that are together, that are grouped together in some way, that are related in some way. So arrays offer us the ability to take all 10 of those grades and put them into one variable that can then be used and be referenced without having to keep track of grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 every time you wanted to use them in a program. So the syntax is very similar to what you've had before with integers. But you'll notice that I've added a little bit of syntax here after int. It's added 2 brackets. And so when we were creating integers, I wouldn't have the bracket, and I would just say integer equals 6. Now that I've added the brackets, I'm telling the compiler, I'm using C# to say I want to create a named collection. So array is an identifier, just like main is an identifier, and number and value, and those things that we've used to name our values, to name our variables and methods and other things in our program. Array is just, in this context, we'll use the term collection so to avoid ambiguity. Collection is just an identifier that identifies an array of integers in this case. And so if I just do 6, that's confusing. You see I've got the squiggly line. It doesn't like that because the compiler's saying, wait, hold up. You said that you wanted an array of integers. You wanted a collection of integers. So I want you to give me a collection of integers, which requires a different syntax. We're going to open a brace like this, and we're going to enter those same grades or similar grades. Use the semicolon still to end the statement. Now it likes that. It says, okay, you've told me that you want an array of integers, a collection of integers. You want to name it collection. And like I said, this can be named anything. This is just an identifier to reference this reference these values. And then I have given it several values inside of these braces. Now, you say, okay, that's great, but how do I get those values out? Well, we're going to reuse these brackets here. If I want to get one of those values out, all I have to do is reference what's called its index. That is values, I use the name of it, 0. So for historical reasons and reasons beyond the scope of this discussion, they're referenced, at least in C# and other C-based languages. The very first value in an array is referenced with the index of 0. So 92 is 0, 93 is 1, 94 is 2, 95 is 3, on and on. That's very important. It's a very important catch that you have to watch out for when working with arrays. At first, it's going to feel a little awkward, but once you use it enough, it'll actually just become second nature. So what I'm expecting is that I'm going to say values, the values array, give me the 0 index, which will be the value 92. If you see here, I get 92. So just like with everything else and with expressions and accessing values, you remember when we worked with methods and we said this value, this evaluates and then passes that value into right line. It works inside out. The same thing happens here. Values 0, getting the value of or the number at index 0 in the values array returns. It's a shorthand to say I want you to return that value at that index. So if I created a number, and integer number equals values, the 0 index, that's the same thing as doing what we just did. There you go, 92. And you can reference these values all the way up. So like we had done earlier, I'm going to copy and paste this and work through each one of those. How many do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the same, roughly the same concept as writing out all of these values like this and then trying to keep track of them throughout the program. It's a whole lot easier to pass around an array of values and pass that around and use that array and then reference it by an index than it is to keep track of actually 7 variables, because you may have arrays that are massive arrays that have lots and lots of values. I've seen arrays with so many variables in them that it makes it impossible to keep track. I mean, you would have to create 10,000 variables and then keep track of all 10,000 variables, which is impossible, impossibly complex at some point. Whereas if I can just pass around a name, an identifier, and then get values based on an index, I don't have to keep track of 10,000 variables. I only have to keep track of 1, and that will take care of the overhead of passing all of these values around. Now, one key thing to remember when working with arrays is that you can go outside of the index. You can go over what's called out of bounds. So if I tried to access values, even though it has 7 elements, if I try to access value 7, I'm going to get an error. It says index was outside the bounds of the array. Now, you'll say, okay, why is that? You have 7 values inside of your array that you just created. Yes, but the index, the very first value, is indexed at 0. Which, like I said, the index is just kind of the address. So actually the highest value, 98, is the 6th index. And you're going to see this a lot when working with arrays. I want you to remember this, that it's the size of the array minus 1. That's how you get the last value in the array. Is you take however many elements there are, and then you subtract 1, and that's the last element, because you had to shift it to the left 1 because the first value is at index 0. So that's a rough introduction to arrays, but I wanted you to understand that we're getting to this point where we're not working with just singular values. We're working with collections of values, and passing around a named collection of values sometimes means the difference between a functional program and something that's so complex that we can't keep track of. And that's one of the reasons for having collections or named collections, in this case an array. Now, array, once it's declared of a certain size, it can be changed. I can't add to the array or make it any larger. after I've created it, at least not in an easy syntactical way. It's a specific side, what's called immutable. Mutable, mutation, it's immutable. You can't change it after it's been created. So those are arrays. A lot of things are being put together, some new things that we're working with, but just keep in mind, you've been familiar with creating variables of different types. We've gone through all the numbers, text, and truth values, so same thing works here. Truth values. I'll create true, false, false, true. For whatever reason, you may want to do that. String. So one of the key things that I want you to start playing with code and what you're learning here is to take some of these the syntax and some of the things you're learning, like different data types, and me saying that an array is just an array of the same type of thing, and start playing with that and say, okay, well, if I created an integer array, I guess I can create Boolean arrays or bool. I guess I can create string arrays or character arrays. Same thing here. Nothing fancy. Etc. So what you've seen is that you've created arrays. So you're creating these collections, these named collections. And you can make them, they have to be of the same type when they're an array. So, strings are identified with these double quotes, characters are identified with these single quotes, but these arrays can hold multiple values of the same type. So next we're going to move into classes and objects, and I'm going to show you how to create your own data types like integer and bool and string, so that you can start creating your own entities within the world. You can look at your world and say, I'm going to create that and put that in my code and work with it.